So, okay, when we start looking at interventions, I mean, this really is going to come down to what symptom we're trying to correct. So, it's something like insulin resistant PCOS. Now, conventionally, this is addressed with birth control and metformin. But it's important to remember that birth control, it can actually worsen insulin resistance. So, in my opinion, I mean, like just putting it in place blindly as a solution, I think we're looking at best at net zeroing those symptoms. Realistically, metformin and birth control, I don't think that much is going to be done. And I think there could be symptoms that potentially were not present resulting from the inclusion of birth control, depending on the individual's sensitivity to those fluctuations in hormones. I think realistically, going about it in a manner that rather addresses dietary interventions and whether or not the individual has the ability to modify their lifestyle, their caloric intake. I mean, universally, exercise, it's a great insulin sensitizer. And if you take someone who previously, I mean, like they've been at a BMI that is problematic and puts them at risk for the development of type 2 diabetes, I would say in combination with something like metformin or any kind of anti-hyperglycemic, this could be beneficial under the guise that they are going to do something to reduce their BMI. So when you look at something like metformin, I mean, like, yes, it's going to be helpful, and I would say it's like the most prescribed medication on account that it's going to decrease blood glucose, improve insulin sensitivity, decrease the action of insulin on the liver. But in terms of tolerance and whether or not this is the best fit for every individual, it's really going to depend on their sensitivity to the drugs. I mean, yes, pharmacodynamically, the effects are going to be very positive, and there are even some effects that suggest that it can work on the gut microbiome. So that in itself could improve symptoms that weren't as prevalent, I guess considered even more mild. But when we look past that for the individual that, maybe doesn't have access to metformin, which in this case with the diagnosis, that shouldn't be a problem. Alternatives would be something like berberine. However, we do have to consider the sourcing and quality control associated with berberine. Some people, they find that they do better on berberine as opposed to metformin. Others find that berberine causes a little more GI distress. So again, like, are we correcting a symptom only to create a new one? If they're able to tolerate metformin, that might be a better route to go. When we look past that, I mean, there is a lot of data for things like myoinositol, acetylcysteine. They tend to improve fertility rates with individuals with PCOS phenotype, but this is largely just tied to reducing oxidative stress, which is probably higher in someone with PCOS. So collectively, if that's the drug that we're using to attack oxidative stress, what I would like to see are other measures also being other avenues also being hammered. So things like reducing your sugar intake, especially through more processed sources that elevate hunger signaling, avoiding extreme caloric deficits for cravings. And I mean, this is something that if the individual is already on a very micronutrient dense diet, then we have to ask, okay, is the quantity impractical? Is the volume of food they're eating or the calories that they're eating, is that impractical in a sense that now this is causing these very acute overages that are ultimately leading to unwanted fat gain. Also just performing cardio, and this largely is tied to the nutrient partitioning benefits that are associated with that. I think when we start getting into just baseline supplements that would help with insulin resistance driven PCOS, I mean, you can look at something like magnesium that's used for several processes throughout the body, but specifically with insulin sensitivity, that would be magnesium biglycinate. You also look at vitamin D, which again, ovarian follicle maturation, which, I mean, in the case of someone who is experiencing amenorrhea or that ovarian dysfunction, I mean, we can certainly say that just as a baseline, regardless of the type of PCOS, this is something that we should be paying attention to, and we should be monitoring whether or not we're seeing those improvements. In contest prep, sure, but largely outside of contest prep in those non-fat loss phase states. Now, when we start looking at post-pill PCOS, the things that you need to remember is that this is temporary and it's going to take some time to resolve. So again, this is under the criteria that you had a regular period before starting the pill. Big things here: avoiding dieting, avoiding going into contest prep, because you really can't avoid amenorrhea when you're someone who's like kind of on the cusp of being adequately resilient enough. If you're aiming to achieve new low levels of body fat, or extending, I guess, like spreading yourself so thin in very long duration contest preps, these are things that can exacerbate or push us back into states of amenorrhea. Moving past that, though, like when we look at supplementation, really the supplementation that's going to be best associated with mitigating some of that ovarian dysfunction. When we look at zinc, I mean, like, this is going to have some effects on ovarian function, and oftentimes we do see that there's some kind of zinc deficiency post hormonal birth control. We also see that for individuals, this is kind of related, but I'll segue on that. Individuals with the copper IUD, that's something that even like peripherally, they're going to have some kind of higher concentration of circulating copper. So it might be worth supplementing with zinc simultaneously, just to ensure that those zinc to copper levels are adequate. Post pill, I mean, like looking at either a form of progesterone support, so that could be micronized bioidentical progesterone, and you would essentially use this to mimic the progesterone elevation from the luteal phase. You can normalize this, normalize that signaling from the hypothalamus to the pituitary, and a step down really from the progesterone would be supplement like a chasteberry or Vitex. And I mean, like, no, you're not going to have the exact same effect, just because that is then causing the release of progesterone as opposed to just putting the progesterone in your body itself. So it's a second like stepwise process, which I think could still be beneficial if someone is unable to access the truly like prescription or non-prescription micronized progesterone. When we're looking at someone who is dealing with that androgen excess, I mean, using a natural supplement like licorice, this could be helpful in reducing like your total serum testosterone levels. This is something I would be a little hesitant to include unless truly like your endogenous production of testosterone is excessive. And I mean, if in that case it's aromatizing into estradiol, we could potentially look at modulators to further break down E2 into weaker forms of estrogen. So that'd be something like DIM or calcium glucarate. But the dosing of in any of these that I'm describing is based on the concentration of the formula. And I really, really have a hard time just giving blanket statements on, hey, this is what you should take. So if that's something you want assistance with, if it's something that you are finding like, hey, I do need to modulate the levels of certain hormones as opposed to others, shoot me a message, set up a consult call, set up a one-time consult, and we'll get you going. Okay. And moving down to inflammatory and adrenal PCOS. Inflammatory PCOS, mostly going to be addressed through dietary intervention. So these symptoms, it's going to largely be the IBS, unexplained fatigue, joint pain, eczema, psoriasis, and I mean, the first step is really going to be removing the dietary triggers. So if you're on, let's say, a very loose diet that includes a lot of trigger foods, I mean, like I would start with just a cleanup, just a minor cleanup, moving to more micronutrient dense foods, potentially even whole foods. But then past that, if you're having still a lot of those digestive symptoms, so maybe we're looking at something like FODMAP based food diet. So something that's removing very specific foods, but like wheat, dairy, if we're able to solve those digestive issues, okay, good. That seems like that managed a lot of the bulk of those symptoms. But oftentimes that is not enough. We're we're also going to need to lower the stimulus of training. So, I mean, whether that be actual weightlifting itself or weightlifting and cardio, just bringing total output down, as this is creating that just excessive state of inflammation. So, looking at this from a multi-pronged approach, I mean, like, yes, correcting the diet, that's going to be a huge one, but it might not be enough depending on what the rest of your lifestyle looks like and whether or not you are able to increase your recovery. So if your recovery capacity is already maxed out and you're still having these symptoms, this might be something where we do have to turn to training and modify the amount of training days or the training volume that you're currently at. Supplemental suggestions. So we got our acetylcysteine, or NAC, melatonin, zinc, magnesium, already covered both of those, but really anything that is going to help lower that oxidative stress, which, I can tell you that a lot of people, they want to have those supplements, those adaptogens, those things that will help you manage stress better. And like, I've used them myself, but really the things that are going to move the needle the most, that is going to be the lifestyle modifications. So number one, identifying your stressors. And this is where I really encourage you to be as specific as you can. Categorize them into the stressors that you're able to control as opposed to the ones you're not able to control. Okay, the ones that are modifiable, the ones that you can modify. At that point, I would take all of my remaining energy and put that towards modifying those lifestyle factors. So that can be sleep, that can be interpersonal relationships, that can be, maybe work stress. There are going to be some that I understand, like, you're not going to have a lot of control over. And if that's the case, yep, you have to look at what other avenues, I guess, what other levers you can deploy. But the ones that are going to pay dividends, that are going to allow you to see the most progress the fastest, are going to be the lifestyle modifications. So when we look at adrenal-based PCOS, right now, there's not a conventional treatment for this. Yes, we can consider like removing stress from your lifestyle as much as possible. And that's something that, again, a lot of people, they will give me some pushback with that, like, oh, I can't modify it. I mean, it is what it is. But past that, I mean, like, really, we're looking at whether or not the individual is experiencing those higher levels of circulating androgens. And if that's the case, okay, maybe putting something that is going supplementally is going to lower that. But I would do that very cautiously. I would definitely do that under the right supervision.